I don't want to go!
Annie screamed, although screamed was a pleasant way of putting it. He shrieked so loud you swore up and down your ears were going to start bleeding at any second, and a rapid pounding in your temple indicated that a migraine was coming on fast.
It's an adventure!
You yelled back, trying to shout over him.
We're going on a super cool mission, just like when I went on the Starkiller base. Don't you want to have a super cool adventure? No!
Annie shrieks, and you bury your face in both hands in exasperation as you turn your back on him.
Help!
You ask and sign at the same time, throwing your fist into your open palm and raising it in the air between Sadie and Ladson. Sadie just shakes her head and points to the door.
I should go.
Your jaw drops in disbelief. You can't deal with both her and Annie right now.
Let me.
Ladson says, standing up, gesturing for both you and Sadie to go outside. You take one pitiful glance back at Annie, who had thrown himself on the floor in his hysterics, before you follow her out the door.
You know, I always had a feeling that kid would be the death of me.
You joke lightly.
Not funny.
Sadie tells you, crossing her arms over her chest.
I don't know. I have a bad feeling about this whole thing. Of course you do.
You sigh.
You worry too much, although I can't say that's really a bad thing with everything that's happened to us.
Anakin lets out a particularly loud screech from back inside, and you look first to the house, then back at her.
You know, on second thought, maybe I should just hand him over after all.
Sadie shakes her head.
You love that kid. If by love you mean tolerate, then yes, I do love him. I don't know. Most of the time I can't help but feel like I'm playing parent to a tiny miniature Kylo Ren.
Sadie just shrugs.
Maybe you are,
she says softly, and you turn to look at her sharply.
I mean, hey, maybe there's some sort of genetic link that makes the men in his family so cranky. Or maybe it's a Force thing.
You shrug absent-mindedly.
I guess I'll find out.
A sudden thought strikes you, and you hit her playfully in the shoulder.
Hey, you think Kylo Ren is even his real name?
She looks at you and laughs, shaking her short hair out of her face.
Would you even want to know what it is? I would.
You tell her, dropping your voice to a hushed yet excited whisper.
I do want to know, Sadie. I do. Like, I love him, but it's like I only love half of a person. I don't know anything about his family or his past, and this might finally be the chance to get some answers.
Sadie twists her mouth into a sad smile.
You know that Hux told me. I don't care what Hux told you. Hux is a liar. It's probably all bullshit anyway.
Sadie rolls her eyes, but you refuse to listen, just like you had every other time she brought it up. You really didn't care what kinds of shit Hux had told Sadie about Ren while she was briefly his captive. No matter what happened, Hux would probably find a way of twisting everything he did to sound worse than it really was. No, if you were going to learn about Kylo's past, you wanted to learn from someone who was probably at least as conflicted about it as you were. You wanted to hear it from his mother.
Take care of yourself,
she says quietly.
And Ladson. And Annie, especially now that I'm not going to be looking after him. Make sure he eats. And make sure he doesn't rip the stitches on his pants. Oh, and make sure you're not going to come see us off?
You ask quietly, a bit of emotion creeping into your voice.
It's probably better if I don't,
Sadie says, looking away from you.
You know.
She lets her voice trail off, and you can't help yourself. You feel tears spring into your eyes as you wrap your arms around her, burying your face in her shoulder.
I love you,
you tell her. You hadn't held her like this or told her you loved her this strongly since she was a prisoner in Hux's room, and you had promised her that Kylo was going to rescue her. Now, it was you who was heading off into unknown danger, and she who would be left wondering what happened to you. You could only hope that Kylo wouldn't have to rescue you as well.
I love you too,
she echoes, hugging you back.
If you get in any danger, just remember to trust yourself. Just trust in the Force. I thought you didn't really like the Force,
you say teasingly as you pull away.
I thought you said it brought nothing but trouble. Yeah,
Sadie shrugs.
but if it's kept you alive this long, it has to be good for something, right?
You suppress a giggle as Ladson comes out to join you.
Am I gonna get a hug too?
You watch as he wraps his arms around her and you have to turn away.
See you, Sadie.
You whisper quietly as you head back inside to where Anakin is packing his stuff.
I see you had a good talk with Ladson.
Anakin just nods his head up and down. His face is still red, his cheeks still wet with his tears, but at least he seems calmer.
We're going on a mission.
He says seriously.
A mission?
You say, sitting down on the couch as you try to figure out what Ladson told him.
What kind of mission? Reconnaissance.
He says, although he clearly struggles with the word.
We're going to be spies. Spies?
You repeat, tilting your head to the side.
What did he tell you? That we can't tell anything to nobody.
Anakin says dutifully.
We're on a secret mission, and we can't talk about the starbase or Dad or anything.
You purse your lips as you stare him down.
And did Ladson happen to mention what they would do to you if you told them?
His face goes pale, and he drops his voice to a whisper.
They'll eat my nose.
Well, at least he wasn't as smart as Kylo was. Then again, he was still only about 5 years old.
That's right.
You say, trying to keep a straight face.
They'll eat your nose, so we gotta be super discreet. Discreet?
He asks, tilting his head to the side.
Quiet.
You say, repeating his own words back to him.
We can't tell anything to nobody.
He nods solemnly, and you head past him into your own bedroom to pack your own things. Sadie had given you a lot of clothing over the past few years, and so you spread it all out on your bed, picking and choosing what to bring. You had packed way too much stuff when you went to the Starkiller base, and most, if not all of it, was gone now, so you wanted to pack sparingly. After a few minutes, you can hear the front door close as Ladson comes in. He trades some words back and forth with Annie before he comes in to talk to you.
Still up?
He asks as he peeks his head in your doorway.
You know I am.
You say, gesturing for him to shut the door behind him.
You know, you don't have to come with us. You can stay here with Sadie and start your own life here.
He just shakes his head.
That's not an option.
You wait for him to turn it into some sort of joke, but no, sometimes it seemed as though the old Ladson really and truly was gone. The Ladson that stood in his place was a soldier, compelled to carry out his duty.
We're going to the Resistance.
You insist.
Seriously, you can't follow Kylo Ren's orders in there. It just seems, I don't know, wrong. I'm not following orders.
Ladson replies.
Ren relieved me of duty the first night he returned, the night he named Annie.
You spin around to look at him.
So you've just been here this whole time because what else am I supposed to do?
Ladson shrugs.
And someone had to take care of the kid. Like it or not, you need looking after. You both do, and I'm most qualified to fill that role.
You look down and to the side, feeling a light blush come over your cheeks.
I'm not saying I don't appreciate having you here, but you deserve to have your own life, your own family. You are my family.
He replies without a moment's hesitation.
You and Sadie and Annie. After all we've experienced, you're my family now.
You extend your arm in front of you, and he takes your hand in his, giving it a tight squeeze. You really couldn't have asked for a better best friend.
Then we'll do this like we've done everything else so far.
You tell him.
Together? Together.
He confirms. You fall asleep surprisingly quickly that night, even though you didn't think you would be able to at all. For the first time, you weren't thinking about waiting for Kylo Ren to visit you. It had been years, and you didn't want to spend your life on this planet just waiting for him to return. Besides, if you were heading towards the Resistance headquarters, you might be able to find out more information on where he was. Not that you would immediately turn tail and run into his arms. It had been years since you had last seen him, and if this was a war he was indeed losing, you didn't know how he'd react to seeing you again. Or how you'd react to seeing him again. To be honest, you were more than a little nervous about getting the answers to the questions you had been asking yourself all these years. Yes, you wanted to know the truth behind who he was in his past, but at the same time, what if he had done something so unspeakably awful that you couldn't be with him anymore? You knew that he had done evil things, But it was all well and good when you could simply hide behind generalizations. What if you had done something so truly wicked and depraved that you could not bring yourself to love him anymore? You couldn't possibly think of anything he could do to starve your affection for him, short of simply abandoning you here, and that was already happening. At least you tried to tell yourself that you still loved him. It was much harder now than it had been before, especially when you were so close to getting answers. How could you say you really loved him when you didn't know anything about his past or who he was when he wasn't with you? Was that really love or just blind devotion? And what would you think of him when you finally had answers? What would you finally do when you found out some of the terrible things he had done? Would you still love him then? Would you still want to be with him? Or worse, what would that say about you if you did? And then again, it wasn't just you anymore. You had a son to think about. It was hardly right to keep your son from his father, but right now Kylo didn't seem all too concerned with that, as he hadn't visited in quite some time. Kylo would be back to train him. You had a feeling that Snoke would not just simply allow that opportunity to slip away. But what if Kylo wanted to train your son in the Force to groom him into becoming some kind of weapon for the First Order? Didn't you have a responsibility to stop that from happening? Maybe that was why the General of the Resistance was really offering her protection. Not just for you and Annie, but for the entirety of the Resistance as well. That night, as you closed your eyes and drifted off to sleep, you made a promise to yourself. As painful as it was sometimes, Anakin was your child, and it was your responsibility to look after him. He was only a child, caught up in something he couldn't understand, much like how you were on the Starkiller base. You were going to have to do everything in your power to protect him from being used and manipulated, just like Kylo Ren had protected you. The only difference was that now you had the power to defend him. You had your staff, and you had the Force. Between you and Ladson, you could physically protect Annie from just about anything. But to actually make sage decisions about what to do next, for that you needed answers, and you were only going to get those from the Resistance. That morning, Ladson hoisted Annie up on his shoulders as you set out to the landing field to leave your academia once again. You have your staff back in your holster at your side, and you're carrying most of your clothes in the pack on your back. You had hardly left anything behind after all, making sure to pack both of Kylo's scarves with you. You didn't know if it felt appropriate bringing them to the Resistance base, but you always slept with one, and it was nice for Anakin to have some small token that once belonged to his father. No matter what you learned at the Resistance base, Kylo was still his father, and there was nothing anyone could do to change that.
I don't like this guy.
You say as you survey the ships all around you.
He says we'll find him, just like that. I mean, if he really wants us to come with him so badly, you think he would have at least made himself a little easier to find. Well, he said he didn't come alone.
Ladson says.
So the ship's probably got to be at least a decent size.
You keep walking along, Annie surprisingly quiet atop Ladson's shoulders as he surveys the ships and the people all around him. For some reason, you think you hear a voice calling out to you in the back of your mind, and you stop abruptly in front of a Corellian light freighter that has definitely seen better days. You hadn't seen one of these in a long while, not since you had worked with that trading crew dabbling in human cargo in your youth. Ladson, who had continued on, stopped to look back at you.
Something wrong? This is a Corellian freighter,
you say, trying to figure out why it seems to be calling out to you.
This isn't just any Corellian freighter.
Says a voice from somewhere behind you.
This is the Millennium Falcon. The Millennium Falcon?
Ladson asks, tilting his head to the side as he turns around to look at Poe.
I swear I've heard the name before.
You mutter under your breath, taking a few steps away from him to stand beside Ladson.
You probably have,
Poe says, taking a few steps toward the ship as he glances at it admiringly.
It's the ship that made the Kessel run in less than 12 parsecs.
You tilt your head to the side, trying to discreetly whisper something in Ladson's ear.
Isn't a parsec a unit of distance, not time? Don't question it,
Ladson says quickly, and you roll your shoulders before dropping them dramatically. You weren't a pilot. It really didn't make any difference to you.
I'm not surprised you recognized it.
Poe continued on.
Ships made by the Corellian Engineering Corporation have a very distinctive look to them as a result of hyperdrive optimization. Even the few Star Destroyers that were subcontracted out to them when Kuwait drive yards couldn't keep up with the Empire's demand.
You turn back to Ladson, who just shakes his head as Poe continues talking.
This is the YT-1300F model, since it's primarily used as an orbital heavy cargo tug and for shuttling lighter cargo between the orbit freight yards and a planet's surface. I'm guessing while you see a lot of light freighters on this planet, you don't see a lot of Corellian freighters around here, huh? No.
Ladson says, shaking his head.
Like you said, this planet isn't a major trading port. There wouldn't be a reason to see a ship this powerful here. Well, come on inside,
Poe says as he cracks a grin and gestures for you to follow him. And you grab Latson's hand and give it a quick squeeze before you follow Poe on board. He seems to notice this interaction as his head tilts to the side in confusion.
You two an item? No.
You splutter, as if disgusted by the insinuation.
I'm her bodyguard.
Ladson says firmly, narrowing his eyes.
And besides...
You want to say more, then decide to just drop it. He doesn't need to know that your devotion lies solely with Kylo Ren. It would actually probably be best if you kept that to yourself.
It's none of your business, anyway. Right.
Poe says with a shrug as he leads the way through the ship, and you can't help but cross your arms over your chest and scowl as you follow after him.
So, you said that you didn't come here alone, but I don't see any sort of an army. Oh, no, not an army.
He says coolly, and you can hear the laughter in his voice.
I was just talking about my co-pilot.
You're about to feel disgusted with yourself when you emerge into the cockpit and suddenly find yourself staring up into the dark eyes of a Wookiee. Wah.
I'm sorry for his terrible Wookiee impression. I asked him to do it. Hello to you too, you say, suddenly feeling very, very small. You hadn't seen a Wookiee in ages. You knew they were more or less friendly, but they were still unbelievably tall and furry, like a giant walking carpet. You speak Shuriwook?
Poe asks, almost in surprise.
And Zoxic.
Ladson replies.
At least partially. Good to know.
Poe replies as he sits down in the pilot's chair. He swivels his head around to look at you.
We expecting any more?
You don't trust your voice, and so you just turn to Ladson.
No.
He says firmly, and Poe just nods as his eyes drift upwards to Annie, who is looking around at everything with a childish sense of curiosity.
He's not usually this quiet.
You explain quickly as Ladson hoists him off his shoulders. You push Annie a little ways out in front of you, but he just stands there, chewing on one of the sleeves of his shirt and not making direct eye contact with anything.
Hey, Annie. This is Poe. Can you say hi?
Annie just shakes his head from side to side dramatically as Poe cracks a grin.
Annie?
Poe says, looking up at you suddenly.
Short for Anakin?
You nod your head slowly.
As in Anakin Skywalker? Who?
You ask quietly, but Poe doesn't answer as he exchanges a look with the Wookiee. You knew that Kylo said he named him after his grandfather, but by the edge in Poe's voice, it sounded like Anakin Skywalker was someone of note.
This here's Chewbacca, but we just call him Chewie.
Poe says, gesturing toward the Wookiee. Annie reaches out and runs his hand along Chewie's hairy leg, grabbing a fistful of shaggy fur in between his tiny fingers.
No, Annie!
You say quickly, pulling him back away from him. You shoot a quick glance of apology up at Chewie, but he just shrugs good-naturedly.
No, it's all right.
Poe says quickly. You bend down to scold Annie, and you can't help but notice that Poe is eyeing the scene with interest.
We should take off then.
You hear a familiar set of beeps behind you, and you don't have to turn around to know that it's that BB unit. He stops in front of Annie and makes a quick series of beeps, but Annie just runs around and hides behind you, peeking out from behind your legs.
Sorry, he's shy around new people. That's okay.
Poe says, leaning forward.
Hey, Annie, have you ever been on a spaceship before?
Annie just shakes his head back and forth again.
Think it's scary?
Annie suddenly steps out from behind you, puffing out his bottom lip.
I'm not scared of anything,
he says in his childish voice as you share a look with Ladson.
Attaboy.
Poe says, giving you a slight nod to show that it's time to take off. You turn around and lift Annie into a seat, making sure to buckle him in securely before you sit down and buckle yourself in. Annie looks across the aisle to Ladson, who crosses both fingers and waves them from side to side.
Ready?
Annie wriggles his wrist, jerking it up and down in a lazy affirmative gesture.
What's that?
Poe calls out as the ship starts to rise into the air.
Tortudaroon.
You respond, putting one hand on Annie's leg out of a parental sense of protection.
Should have guessed that.
Poe says, his hands easily passing over the switches and dials on the console.
There's quite a few Tortudaroo back at base, including Taro's brother.
Your blood suddenly feels like ice in your veins, and you're not sure if it's because you've reached the cold depths of space, or if it's because that was a name you never ever expected to hear again in your entire life.
How do you know that name?
The change in your tone is immediate, almost hostile, and Ladson looks alarmed, whereas Annie just looks scared.
Mommy, who's Taro?
Annie asks, but you don't know how to answer him.
We had contact with him.
Poe explains.
Especially in the beginning. We know everything he did. Setting... Stop.
You say quickly, putting your hands over Annie's ears.
Stop, not here.
Poe just nods.
I'm sorry for your loss. You should know he liked that name, though. Taro. He got made fun of just for having one, but he saw it as a gift from you, and it sure as hell made it easier for us to tell him apart over transmissions.
You smile sadly to yourself as Annie starts to squirm viciously under your hands.
Who's Taro?
He demands. You don't answer right away, not fast enough for his liking, and he starts to scream again.
Who's Taro? Who's Taro? Who's Taro? Who's Taro? Yikes.
You think you can hear Poe say as he turns to Chewie, and Ladson quickly unbuckles himself as he comes around to Annie's side.
He was a friend.
He says quickly.
He was a really good friend of Mommy's, and he
looks at you before turning back to Annie.
He gave his life for her. You know what that means, right? He died?
Annie asks, his voice suddenly soft again. He turns to you for confirmation, and you just nod your head slowly. He drops his head glumly.
Thank you. No, it's thanks, Taro.
You explain.
Thanks, Taro.
Annie repeats obediently. Poe is turned around in his chair now, watching the interaction curiously.
We thank people who do nice things for us without getting anything in return.
You tell him.
Ah.
Poe says, nodding quickly as Annie tugs on your sleeve, pointing to Poe with one outstretched finger.
Does that mean we thank him too?
He asks, looking up at you. You look up at Poe, who just raises an eyebrow and says nothing. You can't help but let a blush spread across your face as you tear your eyes away from him.
You can say thank you.
You say, looking down at Annie.
Thank you, Poe.
His tone, Annie says, his tone a little bit more chipper than it was a few moments ago.
Don't sweat it, kiddo.
He says, leaning forward. Chewie tells Poe the ship is ready to jump, and Poe turns back around to the console.
Hang on, everyone. The Falcon's jump is extremely fast. Ready, Chewie?
Chewie emits a growl, and they both push forward on a wide lever in the center of the console, and you can hear the hyperdrive power up instantly, watching the view in front of you almost immediately change into the swirl of hyperspace as you're driven back in your seats in the fastest jump you've ever experienced.
Like I said, she's fast.
Poe laughs as you turn back to Annie.
Hey, we've got some things for the grown-ups to discuss. Would you like to take a special VIP tour of the ship?
Annie looks up at you, his eyes wide with childish excitement, but you're less sure.
Alone?
You ask cautiously.
Nah, I'll send BB-8 with him.
The droid beeps mechanically next to you, but you're still not convinced. Annie hadn't really seemed to take a liking to him, and you had technically threatened to dismantle the droid. For all you knew, he would take out revenge on you through your son. Chewie lets out a rumble from the seat in front of you, and Poe turns to look at him.
Really? You sure? You don't have to.
You add quickly, leaning forward in your seat, although you can't really get a good look at his face from this angle. Chewie just shrugs, and he makes another low sound in his throat as he gets up.
Can I, Mom?
Annie asks, practically bouncing in his seat. You sigh and rub your face with both hands.
Ask Ladson. Can I, Ladson?
Annie asks, his head dramatically snapping to the other side of his body.
Have fun, Annie.
Ladson sighs as he undoes his buckle. Annie cheers and Chewie scoops him up in his large furry arms as he and BB-8 head out of the cockpit. The three of you watch them go silently before you get up and slip into Chewie's chair to get a better look at the supermassive stars and the large nursery nebulae through the walls of the vortex as they slip by. You're quiet, just taking it all in, how big it is, how silent it is, how dark and cold it all is. Somewhere out there, Kylo Ren was probably on another military installation, on another planet, just stalking back and forth through the corridors. Were you getting closer to him or further away?
I'm sorry.
Poe says at length, and you turn to him sharply, eyebrows raised.
For what you went through.
He turns to Ladson and dips his head, indicating him too, before he turns back to you.
Taro told us what he was doing, putting the wall on your head, using you to draw out Kylo Ren. If it makes you feel any better, he didn't want to do it. We heard about what Ren did when he almost choked you to death.
You chuckle in spite of yourself, but Poe keeps talking.
He didn't want to continue with any of it. He wanted to tell you the truth right then, but at that point it seemed too dangerous to. Why didn't you tell us the truth?
You demand.
Why didn't you tell us that we were basically being led to our deaths if we were discovered? Why not get our consent beforehand? To be fair, we thought we had it.
Poe shrugs.
I wasn't really in on the whole thing, but apparently B told us that he had warned you of the risks and dangers ahead of time. It wasn't until you were all already on board that he revealed that he hadn't actually told you anything. At that point, it was kinda too late to back out.
Ladson speaks up from behind him.
You're lucky she was on board.
He says seriously, jerking his head over to you.
She's the one who got Ren to spare our lives. Couldn't save B or C, or the Tortudaru, but she saved me and Sadie.
Poe senses something in his voice and looks between Ladson and yourself.
How bad was it?
He asks quietly, as if he's afraid to know the answer.
Sadie was the private captive of General Hux.
Ladson explains.
I think you saw the mark around her neck yesterday? I did.
Poe confirms.
That's the scar she got when Ren used his lightsaber to cut through a collar around her neck.
Ladson tells him, saying each word as slowly as possible to make sure it sunk in.
Sadie was only in that position because of the resistance, and she was only freed because of her.
He says, gesturing to you as he speaks.
You don't even want to know what she had to do in exchange for rescuing her.
You brush your thumb up and down against your lower lip and stare out the cool glass in front of you as you listen to Ladson talk. You knew why he was trying to make it sound more dramatic than it was, wanting to make sure it was clear that you had no loyalties to Kylo Ren in any way, making it seem like you all had been prisoners there from start to finish. But a small part of you couldn't tell if what he was saying was true or not. True, you hadn't been the one to rescue Sadie. It felt like you had only served a very small part in her overall rescue, and yet, hadn't at least a part of you manipulated Kylo in order to get him to rescue her? Had he been kind simply of his own accord, or had you used your wit to coax him into doing it? Too many years had gone by, and you could no longer be sure.
I'm sorry,
Poe says as he turns to you.
I can't imagine what you've been through, but you're going to be safe with the Resistance. I can promise you that. Thanks.
You say quietly, and you let the corner of your lip pull into a soft smile as you look at him. Poe seems to relax as he smiles back at you in earnest.
I think we got off on the wrong foot,
He says, putting one hand behind his head.
I know you have no reason to trust us after all you've been through in the name of the Resistance, but we're not bad guys, believe me. Well, if you're any indication.
You say sarcastically, but Poe just sits there and laughs.
Okay, so come on.
He says, leaning forward in his chair.
One pilot to another, you got to tell me how you got off the Starkiller base.
You lean back in your chair and cross your arms over your chest.
Oh, come on. Escaping from the Starkiller base couldn't have been easy. I've escaped from one of their Star Destroyers, but their base is something else entirely. I should know. I was there when we destroyed it, and that wasn't a piece of cake. I'm sure you two have got one hell of a story. You tell it.
You say, gesturing toward Ladson.
You were the pilot, after all. One pilot to another.
You knew it wasn't exactly fair to throw Ladson under the bus like this, but at the same time, you didn't know how to explain that Kylo had voluntarily sent you off the base for your safety. You couldn't tell them that. Not really. Not ever. If they did, they might think that you were sympathetic to the First Order and lock you up when you got to the Resistance base. Of course, You had no way of knowing if that's what they were already planning to do, but your intuition told you that they were actually looking forward to your arrival.
Okay.
Ladson says, letting out a deep breath. He looks at you and you can immediately tell he's regretting the fact that you forgot to rehearse a story last night.
Considering that the First Order takes operational security very seriously, there was no possible way I was stealing one of their heavy cargo rams or a light battlecruiser, let alone one of their SF fighters, so finding a ship that wasn't heavily guarded and powerful enough to make it off planet wasn't exactly easy. Go on.
Poe says, a look of good humor playing on his face.
So,
Ladson continues.
first, I snuck in and I scouted the flight line to find a ship that would work. I finally found my break in one of their side hangars, where I discovered a small fleet of maintenance transports. Unfortunately, the First Order doesn't seem to trust their maintenance and custodial corps, so their transports are only fueled to the minimum amount required to travel from garrison to garrison, both to save on fuel consumption and to discourage, well, unauthorized maneuvers. Luckily, they're all equipped with rudimentary Class 9 hyperdrives just in case they have to double as lifeboats for planetary evacuation. So once we made it off the planet, we could just jump, straight to hyperspace and then just head back home from there.
You stare at Ladson. It all sounds smart enough to your ignorant ears, but you have no clue if Poe is buying any of it. His face is giving nothing away as he simply gestures for Ladson to continue his story.
Well, as you very well know, given all the extra materials the First Order added to the armed quarter so they could directly store stellar energy without fatally irradiating the weapon crew, the planet's gravity is much higher on that side, even with all the extra ballast they added around the far side intake port to prevent tidal disintegration. There was only one transport in the hangar with enough fuel to make it out of the planet's gravity well, but it required a straight vertical path and repulsors at full power, a repurposed armored freighter they used for trips to the intake port. Coincidentally, the armor meant that we could fly perpendicularly through the planetary shield without being shredded. So when the moment was right, we grabbed the ship during a duty section turnover to improve our chance for a successful escape. So let me get this straight. Even though the hangar staff was doing turnover, you took a straight vertical path from the armed quarter hangar bay? That is literally the most dangerous path you can take, even if you don't take their shield into account. Regardless of their turnover, there are still hundreds of turbolaser banks and a dozen missile batteries defending that airspace, and they're never unmanned. How did you manage to get past them without being shot down? With that many guns, it doesn't matter if the ship is equipped with heavy shielding. Plus, there's the constant fighter patrols.
Ladson looks to you for help, and you could tell that although he was spouting off whatever information he learned about how to get off the planet, he didn't really know how to produce a plausible theory of your escape.
That was me.
Poe turns and regards you with interest, but you have absolutely no idea what to say. You barely even remembered getting off the hangar, although you did remember that one stormtrooper who had stared you down for wearing Kylo Ren's scarf as you headed off.
Well, as Ladson said, the controllers were all in the middle of turnover, so they were all in one place. And
Poe asks.
And I went in there where they were all gathered, and I knocked them out with my staff, all of them. Ladson helped me escape. I found the controllers. I knocked them all out with my staff, every last one of them. Ladson was in his stormtrooper uniform and made it look like he was escorting me out of the base, and then we managed to make it to a ship and escape from there.
Poe tilts his head to the side, and you know he smells bullshit.
Uh-huh.
Luckily, Ladson is quick to intervene.
So once she took the controllers out of the picture, she was fantastic, by the way. You know how skilled she is with that staff. The gunners weren't an issue, since they'd have no reason to fire on a friendly craft without a direct targeting order from Central Control. And without an interception order, all the fighters saw was just a friendly heavy freighter leaving the planet at full power. Nothing unusual there.
You still sense Poe's suspicion, and you try to do anything in your power to cover your tracks, trying to deflect the situation onto him.
It's just curious to me how you were able to destroy the Starkiller base.
You tell him.
Especially with all those turbo lasers and missiles and fighter patrols that you just mentioned.
You cross your arms over your chest and looked at him expectantly. Poe looks at you and chuckles. If he senses your misdirection, he doesn't seem at all fazed by it.
It's hard to hit incoming fighters with ground defenses since their targeting positions are nearly impossible to forecast due to their high speed and small size.
Poe explained smoothly.
So their ballistic predictors malfunction, and although their fighter pilots were better than the Empires ever were, they only have so many squadrons to pursue enemy fighters. I managed to shake my first tail, and the rest of my squadron was able to keep them off my back so I can fire the final shot. Fair enough.
Ladson murmurs.
And where did you learn to be a pilot?
Poe asks, turning to face him. Ladson glances at you and you sulk, crossing your arms over your chest. It was obvious you weren't going to be able to bullshit your way out of this, although that didn't mean that Poe needed to know the whole truth either.
He was trained aboard the Starkiller base, okay?
Poe looks visibly taken aback.
They were training a POW not only how to pilot a ship, but also how to get off the Starkiller base.
He looks between you and Ladson.
We bribed the controllers.
You say immediately.
Grabbed the shift, left through the corridor and the shield. It was smooth sailing from there.
Ladson says casually.
Bribed with what?
Poe asks, but you just shake your head.
A gentleman wouldn't ask and a lady wouldn't tell.
You say curtly, hoping that the blow to your innocence would be enough to drop the line of inquisition.
They would let 2 resistance POWs go in exchange for sexual favors.
Poe asks.
I'm sorry, you're very pretty, but I doubt that.
Your face turns bright red, and you would have punched him in the arm if Ladson hadn't done it for you. Poe grimaces as he rubs his arm, but he doesn't protest. He knew he had it coming.
Just tell him.
Ladson sighs, turning his back on you.
He knows we're full of shit anyway. Not totally.
You tell him.
You did learn how to fly in the Starkiller base.
You turn back to Poe.
Kylo Ren let us go. Kylo Ren let you go? Just like that?
You rub your upper arm uncomfortably and look away.
Okay, now I know you're full of it. You're saying Kylo Ren just let you go without asking for anything in return?
You don't answer, and Poe holds up his hands.
Okay, fine. Don't tell me how you escaped. I was just trying to make friendly small talk.
Ladson grumbles something about going to check on Annie and heads out of the cockpit. You sit there in uncomfortable silence with Poe, almost wishing that you had gotten up to go with him.
Hey.
Poe says quietly, and you turn around to face him.
You okay?
You just shrug and look back out the window.
I don't think this will help you feel any better, but, you know that mind probe thing he does? He did it to me too. Yeah?
You asked dryly. You weren't quite sure why he said it like it was supposed to be some sort of intimate bonding moment. Kylo Ren did that to literally everyone. It was only intimate when he had done it with you.
Yeah.
He says.
So I know how painful it can be.
You don't say anything.
I can't imagine what sort of stuff he did to you.
You think about all the other kinds of stuff Kylo had done to you. Stuff that Poe probably couldn't even dream of. And you let a grin cross your face before you're even aware of it as you bite your lip.
You don't know the half of it.
Poe stares at you in confusion and you just shake your head.
We know he almost killed you.
Poe says firmly.
But I just want to let you know that you'll be among friends at the base. Friends?
You repeat, forcing a laugh. You had been to the First Order's base, and you had seen how relationships were handled on a military installation. There was no need for friendships, no need for anything outside of the officially structured hierarchy.
Are you really friends with anyone on base? Aren't you just a delivery boy? I guess some people call me that,
he says with a shrug.
Other people call me Black Leader, or Commander Poe Dameron, leader of both the Blue and Red Squadrons of the Resistance.
Your jaw drops slightly as you raise your eyebrows in surprise.
Commander? You see?
He says with a cheeky grin.
I told you I wasn't going to impress you with idle flirtations.
You bite your lip and look away.
So we're important enough for them to send a commander all this way to pick me and Annie up? Things are different at the Resistance,
Poe tells you.
but I think you're gonna like it there.
He winks in your direction, but you just shake your head.
So, what'd you say? Friends?
You exhale a long breath through your nose before you thrust your hand out in front of you.
Friends.
He shakes on it, a good firm grip, and you can't help but feel his tough calloused skin underneath your sensitive palms.
But if we're gonna be friends, you have to teach me how to use a stick like that.
He tells you.
Staff.
You correct him.
Stick, staff.
He shrugs.
You really got me good there. Not many people have been able to sneak up on me before. Yeah, well, you better watch your back around me.
You say firmly.
Friends or not, once we get to that base, I'm not letting Annie out of my sight.
He just shakes his head and grins as he looks back outside.
General Organa is going to love you.
You purse your lips together as you mimic his pose, looking into the darkness of space stretching on and on ahead of you. So, Kylo Ren's mother had a name. General Organa. You couldn't wait to meet her.